This is Living with Sunny with my co-host Thomas. Today we have a wonderful guest, Jaewon Peter Chun. Jaewon is in New York, Thomas is sitting in London, and I'm sitting in the most beautiful part of the world called Seattle. Jaewon is very involved in smart cities. And I find that in a way, it's a very relevant topic given what's happening with COVID, smart cities and COVID. What are smart cities all about? Is smart city all tech? How do you take smart cities and well-being and merge them? So there's so many things that come to my mind. So we'll have a fantastic discussion. Welcome, Jaewon, to our show.
Thank you for having me.
So, Jaewon, I will start with, you were born in South Korea. Share with us your childhood. What was it like growing up? And I presume you grew up your early childhood in Korea.
So, yeah, actually, I never received that question since 2010. But,
wow!
Just to share my childhood. Actually, I was born in Seoul, South Korea. I'm actually just old enough because I'm currently 49 years old. So my childhood is completely different from what you see in South Korea, because a lot of people might watching lots of contents like cultural contents and Netflix and also the music from South Korea, and it's not exactly the same thing what I experienced when I was young, because my father's generation was actually suffered from the colonizations by Japan, and also my grandfather, he had passed away during Korean War. And my mother's side, my grandmother, my aunts, and all these relatives, they actually just took a risk and to cross the Han River when the Korean War bursted out. So I think that South Korean government, they actually set the bomb to disconnect the bridge so that they can actually protect the North Korean tanks, across the river. So our grandmother and my grandfather on my mother's side, he passed away. He disappeared. So he wasn't actually working for the South Korean government back then. So he was disappeared, and all my families, like my grandmother, my aunts, they actually looking for my grandfather. They could have found him. Now he's buried in the National Cemetery. So then I think that there was really horrible moments for everybody, because a lot of families, they just forced to be separated because all of them is the refugees, and they actually trying to avoid from the massacre and also the fires and everywhere. And then they actually resided in Busan. So Busan is actually second largest city in South Korea, and also the gateway to South Korea in terms of logistics and everything. So now it's currently number 3 biggest harbor in Asia. But most is actually the city represents the kind of cherish the moments that a lot of people had anger and also the sadness back then. Because about 3 million people, more than 3 million people at least, they died during the war. So my family is in the middle of the situation, and I was born in 1970s, and then I think that the economic status of South Korea was really poor. Probably maybe by ranking of UN is actually ranked 100 something. So it's really pretty much behind of even the developing countries.
Wow.
My childhood was something you can not really imagine, because nothing was really equipped. There was no sewage systems in my town, and a lot of poor people lived there, and the job was not really provided to everybody. So my experience in my early preschool years and maybe kindergartens and secondary schools is completely different from the people, new young generations. They actually experience right now, because the Korean economy currently is almost 6 or 7, I think, and it's actually one of the club country among the most advanced countries in the world. So you can that's why I think a lot of people from all different countries, they can judge South Korea, or maybe they can think about South Korea as something different. If you go to Busan, Busan has the only one UN cemetery, official UN cemetery is there. So there's no UN cemetery around the world. There's only one in Busan. So if you go there, there's actually a home of, I think 6,000, 7,000, fallen soldiers from the UK. They're still there. And I remember Queen Elizabeth II, she visited, no, she didn't visit. And she was about to visit, but she canceled somehow. But, if you are actually the foreigners, if you go to South Korea, the number one destinations as a tourist is definitely DMZ and also UN Cemetery. And also another, the war memorials and war museum in South Korea. It's actually really remarkable, and you feel something different feeling because, everything in there. So it's actually the forgotten war from the perspective of here in the United States, or probably maybe UK. But more than 30 different countries, they participated in the war, and during Korean War. A lot of people died. And also the entire country is really ripped off. And also as a result, there are two countries divided. So I grew up in that kind of generations. So my father is actually well educated, luckily. And my mother, my grandfather, he passed away during the war, and his brother actually went to Waseda University in Japan. As I said, that time was actually the colonized era for South Korea. There was no country. So a lot of people in South Korea, they sacrificed for, wishing for the country's independence. So we kind of have bondness with any countries around the world and without their country, or without, hoping for the independence. So I kind of felt that way. So
this must be, Sonny, one of the best answers we've ever had to a question on Tell Us About Your Childhood.
It is very captivating, and it's actually conjuring up, so many questions in my mind, and the connection of Jaewon's career path and career progression. Just his childhood, I think his childhood has defined him in a big way.
Yeah. So and also,
Jaewon, would you describe your childhood as happy or challenging? You would describe it as happy.
It's kind of really complicated feelings that I have, because a lot of friends of mine when I was a kid, they died from the chickenpox or the measles and some accidents. And
because you had no vaccines?
There was no vaccines back then. And so, as I said, South Korea was really poor back then. And then the beginning of 1980s, and Hyundai is actually the first company in South Korea to manufacturing the first car, is actually introduced and exported to American market. And then there was actually huge and dramatic growth, economic growth in the beginning of the 1980s. So 1988, South Korea hosted the Summer Olympic Games. That year, 1988, is the kind of the milestone that becoming the current South Korea in many ways. So there's a huge gap between the generations. So my generation is actually, we can overlap between all the generations and also the younger generations.
Jaewon, now, you have spent a lot of your career time, you have a lot of expertise in smart cities. Mm-hmm. But there's the tech side of smart cities, which we'll talk about, but there is also perhaps a softer side of smart cities. The very fact, how can our kids and smart cities coexist? Because tech can be very detrimental to the mental resilience. We look at social media. From morning to night, we have a device in our hand and we are hunched down looking at the device in a small screen. There's tech all over in our homes, etc. So let's move the conversation to smart cities and our teenagers and youth. how do they, first of all, I think just for our audience, of course, when you say smart city, a lot of things come to your mind. If we just have to tell our audience, what is a smart city and what is the vision of a smart city? Share that with us. And then let's figure out how do various cohorts, the teenagers and the youth, adults, seniors, how do they thrive in a smart city? How does humanity thrive in a smart city?
Well, that's a really broad question because I don't know exactly where to start. Because
this is tough questions night, Jaewon. There was only tough questions.
Yeah, always tough questions because because I need to just figure out exactly what those questions from where. Because I have exactly the same questions from the leaders, like decision makers of the cities or municipalities or the central government or the politicians. At the same time, I actually receive questions from the industries or tech startups or any media, and also the young entrepreneurs as well. So the answer might be a little bit different. But it's simply you can think about this way. The smart city is because a lot of people might misunderstand the concept of smart city. Smart city, yeah, of course, because the name smart, because we're using smartphones. Some of the products is actually produced through smart factory systems. So smart means technology or IT or something like that. But my philosophy, my concept of the smart city is a little bit different because the technology cannot be advanced to human in people. So I always used to say the human centristic kind of concept, because a lot of people talking about standardization, for example. The first thing that I actually did when I was the master planner of the Smart City South Korea National Pilot Projects, which was actually $1.5 billion project. Now it's $6 billion. I designed it because they actually hired me, the presidential office of South Korea hired me as a master planner. So because I'm not an architect, I'm not a big IT expert, but my job used to be like, nurturing the startups in London. So my company has nurtured more than 300 startups by now, and some of them, more than 10 companies, become unicorns. So,
wow.
The ecosystem is called the Level 39 in Canary Wharf. So I used my entire years that I was dedicating myself in London, the beginning of 2010s, was almost 7 years by now. So the World Smart Cities Forum, as I'm actually sitting as the president there, is actually the UK-based nonprofit organization. And the startups was nurtured by my organizations and also the ecosystems called the Level 39, which is also the Europe's largest open tech cluster. It was highly influenced by the new challenge by the former Prime Minister, David Cameron. So he adopted the biggest policy changes. So one of them is absolutely about how to strengthen the innovation ecosystem in London. There's kind of very natural, genuine questions from the leadership. Why the UK doesn't have Silicon Valley? And why even the Tallinn and Estonia have grown so fast with the innovation? And also a lot of cities in Europe, they're actually just struggling to top of the innovation hub, based on their cities or something like that. So London was really conservative. I think Thomas understands the atmosphere, but now it's actually just dramatically changing because you meet a lot of startups, even Canary Wharf, the more than 95% is actually bankers, the people working at the insurance company or financial institute. And since 2014, it's now changed. A lot of the entrepreneurs and tech startups and CEOs and CTOs and the founders, they gather in this, new financial district in London. And a lot of people really get successful because of the, government-driven, challenging projects, which is London Tech City initiatives. And it's really influenced a lot of different kind of platforms in London, like fintech, cloud, data, data hub or data services. And so I believe that, if you compare the numbers of startups in between 2010 and now 2020, is huge difference, because I still remember only 300, 400 startups, they actually working inside London, because the market price is really ridiculously high. And I don't think a lot of startups back then couldn't afford to pay those. So that's why the people, they just getting out of city, and they just trying to find number one mission for them is finding out the non-expensive places they can actually work with others.
In the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C., the Thomas Jefferson Memorial, it talks about the pursuit of happiness. But if Sunny was building the Singh Memorial in Seattle, it would talk about the pursuit of well-being, wouldn't it, Sunny?
Absolutely. For me, and as Jaewon was talking, well-being or holistic well-being has incorporates into it societal well-being, planetary well-being. Whereas pursuit of happiness can be very individualistic. That means I am happy. As far as I'm concerned, happiness is a byproduct of holistic well-being. If you're living life holistic well-being, not only you thrive, your family thrives, your social tribe thrives, society or humanity, the people that touch or around you, the community thrives, and the planet thrives. And this all cycle feeds into each other, and therefore the individual always thrives. Whereas a pursuit of happiness or happiness becomes a byproduct of holistic well-being. Like that becomes a platform, that becomes a way to live. In the process, you live from joy, which is everlasting. Because when you start learning how to live from joy, you will always be happy, even in the face of adversity, because it becomes saying, hey, you know what? What a challenge. Great. I got another challenge in life that's going to make me grow. Let me fight it. Let me endure it. Let me persist it. Let me be resilient. In the process, it's an evolution of the human being. And it's almost like, you can't today quantify happiness. I mean, are you 1 happy, 2 happy, 3 happy? But you can understand the elevation of happiness. Oh my God, it's like, I tell people, unless you've had the chocolate that has no preservatives and only lasts 2 days, you haven't had real chocolate. Until then, you're having confectionery, as far as I'm concerned. And therefore, you do not know what the best chocolate is, right? So it's almost like you go to the next level and say, oh my God, this is true happiness. And then you go to the next level. So I believe that you have to, and in that context also, when you talk about smart cities and holistic well-being or well-being, my take is smart cities should incorporate into the whole framework. How does the community in the smart city, at the end of the day, Jaewon is right, put the humans at the center of smart city. It is about humanity and humans, not about the smart city. It's about enabling something for humanity in a positive way. It's almost like well-being should be a core value of smart cities, right? And how do you achieve that holistic well-being for the people living in the smart city by giving them all the other ancillaries so their holistic well-being is enabled and grown?
Right. The well-being actually applies to people, as well as the, invisible entities, even companies or maybe nature.
Does that mean, Jaewon, if you're in a smart city and you have the infrastructure where everyone can work from home and you don't have to burn the fuel and you don't have to use the trains, that people will naturally have a higher well-being because they haven't got to do all that traveling?
Well, actually, that's also a good question. I like to say that the most important thing among the 3 basic human needs, which is you wear, you live, and you eat. So you have to deal with these kind of 3 components.
Jaewon, I'm thinking is like smart cities should also promote the concept of transparency. And let me tell you what I mean by that.
Exactly.
Today, my garbage truck comes every Friday and picks up all the garbage outside. The cycle are recyclable, the non-recyclable, etc. I have no clue what happens to it. Is it dumped in my own city, close to my city? What are they doing to it?
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
So in a way, smart cities can enable an individual within that community they live in as to and it could be that somebody else's city's garbage is getting dumped into my city. And you can take this metaphor anywhere else. I'm just giving an example. And in a way, smart cities should bring that visibility to every individual in a community as to the state of being and the state of the city, the state of the town, the state of the infrastructure, the state of the community. It should make it transparent and visible right in front of their faces and saying, this is where you're living and how you're living. Are you okay with it? Right? That is tech enabling our living, not tech ruling our living. Our lives are not ruled by tech, but are enabled by tech. Humans at the center of it. How green is my city? How clean is my city? How clean is my water? How clean is my air? And becomes visible. But that's the metrics I want to see in my face every day. So it awakes me every day and saying, I'm not going to accept it, or I can live with this. And an active conversation happening in that community through the smart city concept of saying the community has good conversations about how to bring the community more alive and live well.
This is very important because we usually call it as transparent governance systems, because most of the cities developed by a very small group. It could be like kind of the big companies or maybe the mayor's office. They, monopolize this kind of the stage and also the process. The smart city is more open to the people, citizens. So citizens' involvement in this kind of activities is more important in the smart city initiatives.
Which smart city do you admire and respect the most as the best example of a smart city with the well-being piece as well? Which is your number one worldwide?
Okay, that is actually almost like a last question, I feel. But as I think about these questions, there is no smart city really existing in the world yet, because the concept of smart cities been like 20, 30 years. When I traveled to Netherlands when I was a kid, when I was 20, so I had a backpack travel myself and for almost 2 months. So one of the cities actually I landed was Amsterdam. Do you know what they actually tried as smart city? They didn't call it smart city, but for me, right now, it was a smart city plan. They trying to kick all the cars inside of center city out of the city.
Yes.
Right. So that's why they built some kind of the bicycle platform. So sharing bicycle platform inside of the Amsterdam, like including Dam Square and red light streets and the central station around. So most of the cars, but it's not 100% empty, but probably maybe most of the cars, not licensed cars, they had to just drive outskirts of the center city area. So I saw that the sharing bicycle systems, that was my first sharing systems in my life. And it was very shocking because if you actually ask this kind of questions, do you want no cars running around the center city? Probably a lot of cities, even here in New York City, if you have the surveys to New Yorkers, do you think you will be okay if you cannot run? You cannot run your cars, you cannot park your cars in front of your house? Almost 100% that will be actually opposed to it. So, but this city like Amsterdam, they tried it. They tried it in the beginning of 1990s. And now the Amsterdam is working on many different things, because if you actually just visit in Amsterdam, you can still see lots of cars running around the center city. But the concept is different, because the pollutant emission level back in 1990s was really bad. But the car industry now is evolving, almost like clean energy kind of stuff. So the younger generation, the dominating generation in Amsterdam, is quite different thinking, because they feel something they want to work very close to their home. But the buying the houses inside of the center city of Amsterdam is too expensive. So that's why the Amsterdam government, they try to utilize the water. So they build more water house so that the people can reduce their time between the house and work. So proximity is actually really close between home and work. Now, during pandemic, post-pandemic, everybody probably might talk about maybe proximity can be almost same. I mean, you can work from home, or you can mixture together with your work home. Maybe just like go to the office once in a while, probably once per week, or maybe a couple of times per month. You can actually communicate with your coworkers by virtual metaverse systems. So metaverse and proximity, is actually another the rising concerns for smart city concept during pandemic, post-pandemic.
We, any one of us living in any city, any town, do not know our state of environment in that. Like, I live in Bellevue. I do not know the state of Bellevue. I have no clue. I live in the city. I eat in the city. I drive in the city. I walk in the city. But, yes, I can breathe. I can see beautiful things.
Mm-hmm.
But doesn't mean that it is the city truly is beautiful from within. It is thriving from within. And so it's almost like it's now the imperative, starting one city, one town at a time, to have what we call the dashboard of living.
Mm-hmm.
A smart city say we're going to have a dashboard of living. We're going to tell you who your counselors and your people who are governing the city, who are they, what are they doing, what have they achieved, what have they committed to, and how do you measure them against? How the basic utilities work, how's the air quality, how's the water quality, how many things there are for society to thrive, parks, theater, things to do. How do children, are there parks for children? How many children are playing in the parks? These should be like a dashboard that you can click and go deeper and saying, this is the state of Bellevue. This is the state of, a borough in London. This is the state of my city or my town. And in a way, it brings the transparency right in your face, saying this is the true state of your city or your town versus I just live in a nice house, I drive a nice car, I eat nice, and therefore life is good.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean life is good, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are there homeless in my city? How many homeless are there in my city, right? That should be part of my dashboard that I can see, and that should become my go-to destination, saying, I love to click on it because a beautiful dashboard tells me everything. Guests visiting me, let me tell you, what can we do here? What's going on over here? How is the population feeling? Whether it translates into happiness and stuff like that. I think having a smart dashboard for every city, smart or not, mm-hmm. which ties into the well-being of that city, which translates to the well-being of people in the community living there, is almost an imperative. Mm-hmm. And if smart cities is a concept that is growing and thriving and become more and more commonplace, then the well-being or the smart dashboard, which gives true transparency, mm-hmm. is also very important. In a way, it's almost like, mm-hmm. It's almost like we are changing the way people look at where they live, where they want to move, not because of hearsay or, let's move to Seattle, because of X, Y, Z. No, let's go to the dashboard and really look at it. In mm-hmm. Seattle, let's look at this neighborhood and really dive deep into it. And let people compete on the dashboard and saying, we're going to make our city better in parks, better in, air, better in this. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the conversation. Therefore, in the end, what happens? You start an active conversation among the community that is living there.
Yes.
And that conversation leads to beautiful things. If the community is vested in their own well-being and success of their city, mm-hmm. and especially the smart city, and that smart city makes it a component saying, we are going to do this, where the community becomes an active participant in improving the community because we're going to give them visibility. Mm-hmm. I think that it's almost like showing them how to fish. They themselves will fight to make the city better. They will demand better. They'll expect better. They'll pick the right set of people to govern and make things right for them. Mm-hmm. And they also, by the way, will be happy to contribute more in taxes, in whatever that is, because they have visibility how the city or town is improving, right?
Agreed.
Totally totally agree with you, because dashboard is kind of, the very handy and also the important measure that you can build a better city. Because just like driving your car, you can see the dashboard, you understand the status of your car. If the car is some kind of with the problems with the tire or engine oil, and you need to fix it. Without dashboard, you cannot understand.
In this whole concept of smart cities, to incorporate what we call visibility and transparency, which I believe will lead to the overall well-being of the community or society that lives in there. And my call to action to everybody listening to this conversation is smart city, no matter if you're implementing one, you're thinking of one, or whichever city or town you live in, the community you live in, start thinking that as you improve your city to be better for you and the people in there, how can you weave in the well-being components? That means there's well-being of society, there's planetary well-being as far as your city is concerned, and of course your personal well-being. And look at those things, demand transparency. And I think to the smart city community out there that is building smart cities, let's build transparency and let's weave in holistic well-being into the smart city concept. It's a great marriage as far as I'm concerned. Jaewon, it's a delight to have you on the show. It's a delight to have this conversation with you. I have learned a lot. I'm sure our audience will have learned a lot. And we look forward to continuing this conversation with the next chapter of how some of these progress is being made in smart cities. Thank you, Jaewon.
Thank you, Jaewon.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Sunny.
This is Living with Sunny with my co-host, Thomas. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.